The Afghan sun hung like a copper coin in the cloudless sky, beating down on the rocky terrain with merciless intensity. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines above. Something felt wrong. In his 12 years as a SEAL, he'd learned to trust that gut feeling, the one that whispered danger before the bullets started flying. "Reaper, we're clear on the target," came the voice of Petty Officer First Class Marcus Doc Williams through the comms. "Package is secured and ready for transport." Morrison keyed his radio. "Copy that, Doc. All teams were moving to exfil Point Bravo. Stay sharp." SEAL Team 6's Bravo Squad had spent 3 days tracking their high-value target through the mountains of Kunar province. The Taliban intelligence officer they'd captured knew the locations of several terror cells operating along the Pakistani border. Getting him back to base alive was crucial. The 8-man team moved in a tactical formation through the narrow valley, their boots crunching on loose shale and dried earth. Morrison took point with Collins, his designated marksman, while the rest of the team surrounded their hooded prisoner. The valley walls rose steeply on both sides, creating natural choke points that made Morrison's skin crawl. This was ambush country. Every rock, every shadow could hide an enemy fighter. "I don't like this, boss," Collins muttered, his M110 sniper rifle sweeping the high ground. "Too quiet. Where are the shepherds, the goat herds? This valley should have activity." Morrison nodded grimly. Collins was right. The absence of civilian life was a red flag. "Double time it, gentlemen. Let's get to that extraction point." They'd covered another 200 meters when the world exploded. The first RPG screamed overhead, so close Morrison felt the heat wash over him. It detonated against the valley wall behind them, sending a shower of rock fragments and dust into the air. Before the echo faded, machine gun fire erupted from 3 positions simultaneously, a coordinated ambush designed to catch them in a kill box. "Contact right, contact left, multiple hostiles." Morrison's voice boomed over the chaos as his training took over. "Get to cover. Move, move, move." The SEALs scattered like a well-oiled machine, each man knowing exactly what to do. Bullets kicked up dirt geysers around their feet as they sprinted toward a partially destroyed compound 30 meters ahead. It was the only cover in sight, a crumbling structure that had probably been bombed during the Soviet invasion decades ago. "I'm hit," the cry came from Petty Officer Jackson, the team's communications specialist. He stumbled, blood spreading across his left thigh. Without hesitation, Doc Williams grabbed Jackson under the arms and dragged him toward the compound, laying down suppressive fire with his sidearm. Morrison and Collins provided covering fire, their weapons barking in controlled bursts at the muzzle flashes dotting the mountainside. They crashed through the compound's broken doorway as another RPG impacted nearby, the explosion lifting Morrison off his feet and slamming him into a wall. His ears rang, but he forced himself up, doing a quick head count. 7 accounted for. Where was Thompson? "Thompson's down," shouted Petty Officer Ramirez, the team's breacher. "He took shrapnel to the shoulder. He's breathing but needs immediate attention." Morrison's jaw clenched. 2 wounded, surrounded, and outgunned. He crawled to a window and risked a look outside. His blood turned cold. Taliban fighters were emerging from concealed positions all around them, behind boulders, in foxholes, from caves in the cliff face. They'd walked straight into a trap. "Collins, give me numbers," Morrison ordered. Collins was already at another window, his scope scanning the enemy positions. "I count. 28, no, 30+ hostiles. They've got us in a horseshoe formation, boss. PKM machine guns at 10 and 2 o'clock, RPG teams at 12 and 3. They're moving to encircle us completely." Morrison grabbed his radio, switching to the emergency frequency. "Viper Base, this is Reaper 6. We are in contact, multiple hostiles, 2 urgent casualties. Request immediate QRF and air support at Grid November Kilo 7492. How copy?" Static crackled for what felt like an eternity before the response came. Reaper 6, Viper Base, we copy your traffic. Be advised, a severe sandstorm is moving through your sector. All aircraft are grounded. Earliest possible extraction is 40 minutes. Can you hold? 40 minutes. It might as well have been 40 hours. Morrison looked around at his team. Doc was working frantically on Jackson and Thompson, trying to stop the bleeding. The others had taken defensive positions at the windows and gaps in the walls, conserving ammunition and selecting targets carefully. Their faces were grim but determined. These were the best operators in the world, but they were still human. They could bleed. They could die. Reaper 6, I say again, can you hold your position? Morrison keyed the radio, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Viper Base, Reaper 6, we'll hold. Just get those birds here as fast as possible. Reaper 6 out. He switched to the team frequency. Listen up. Extraction is 40 minutes out. We hold this position, we protect our wounded, and we conserve ammunition. Pick your shots, make them count. We've been in worse situations than this. When? Ramirez asked, grinning despite the circumstances. Morrison almost smiled. I'll let you know if we survive this one. The Taliban had stopped their initial assault and were regrouping, their commanders shouting orders in Pashto. They knew the Americans were trapped. They had time. They could wait for reinforcements and then overrun the position with overwhelming numbers. Through the window, Morrison watched as a technical truck mounted with a heavy machine gun rolled into view. This was bad. That weapon could shred their cover in minutes. He aimed his rifle, calculating the distance, too far for an effective shot with his M4. The machine gunner climbed into position behind the weapon, and Morrison knew their situation had just gone from critical to desperate. He took a breath, steadied his aim, and prepared to fire. Then something impossible happened. The machine gunner's head snapped back, and he crumpled into the truck bed. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle echoed across the valley, but it hadn't come from Morrison's position. Someone else was shooting. Someone was out there in the mountains, and they were on the SEAL's side. For 3 heartbeats, nobody moved. The machine gunner's body lay draped over the heavy weapon, blood pooling in the truck bed. Morrison's finger froze on his trigger. He hadn't fired that shot. Neither had Collins or any of his team. What the hell? Collins breathed, his eyes still pressed to his scope, scanning frantically for the shooter's position. Before anyone could respond, another crack split the air. A Taliban fighter positioning an RPG on the ridge above them jerked violently and tumbled down the rocky slope like a broken doll. Then another shot, and another. Each report came from a different direction, echoing off the valley walls, making it impossible to pinpoint the source. We've got a friendly sniper out there, Ramirez shouted, ducking as return fire from confused Taliban fighters sprayed wildly across the mountainside. Morrison pressed himself against the wall, his mind racing. Friendly, we're the only U.S. unit in this sector. Collins, can you identify the shooter? Collins was already working, his trained eye sweeping the ridgelines through his high-powered scope. The distance, the angle, the precision of those shots. Whoever was out there was operating at an elite level. Negative, boss. Range is, Jesus, at least 1,200 meters. That's championship-level shooting. I can't get a visual. Another Taliban fighter dropped. This one had been trying to flank their position from the east. Then the squad leader coordinating the attack fell, his radio still clutched in his hand. The enemy forces were beginning to panic, firing randomly at anything that moved, unable to locate their attacker. Count them, Morrison ordered. I want to know exactly how many this ghost is taking down. 5 confirmed kills, Collins reported, marking each one mentally. Wait, make that 6. Hostile down at 3 o'clock, 800 meters. The precision was surgical. Every shot found its mark. No misses, no wasted ammunition. Morrison had worked with some of the best snipers in the military, but this was something different. This was art form meeting deadly science. Doc Williams crawled over from where he'd been treating the wounded. Jackson's stable, and I've got Thompson's bleeding under control, but both need real medical attention soon. What's happening out there? We've got an angel on overwatch, Morrison replied, risking another glance through the window. The Taliban forces were in disarray now, taking cover and yelling at each other. Their ambush had become a nightmare. Someone's picking them off one by one. Who? Doc asked. That's the million-dollar question. Morrison grabbed his radio and began cycling through every frequency: military, coalition forces, even local police bands. Unknown shooter, this is Reaper 6, U.S. Navy SEAL Team 6. Identify yourself. What's your call sign? How copy? Nothing but static. He tried again on a different frequency. Unknown ally, we appreciate the assist. Please identify so we can coordinate. Over. Silence. They're not responding, boss, said Petty Officer Chen, their communications specialist who'd taken over for the wounded Jackson. But I'm picking up something weird. Short burst transmissions on an encrypted channel, non-standard frequency. Someone's sending data, but I can't crack it. Morrison's eyes narrowed. Can you tell where it's being sent? Chen shook his head. It's bouncing through multiple relays. Whoever they're talking to doesn't want to be found. Another shot rang out. A Taliban spotter who'd been trying to locate the sniper collapsed backwards off his perch. Collins kept counting. That's 10, boss. 10 confirmed kills from our mystery shooter. The enemy fighters were becoming increasingly desperate. Their commander, identifiable by his radio and the way others deferred to him, was screaming orders, trying to rally his men. He pointed toward the dried riverbed that ran along the valley's southern edge, gesturing for his fighters to use it as cover for a flanking maneuver. Morrison saw it too. Collins, they're going to try the riverbed. Get ready to. He never finished the sentence. Muzzle flashes erupted from a completely different location, northeast, maybe 900 meters out. The mystery sniper had somehow moved position without anyone seeing them. The Taliban fighters who'd entered the riverbed were caught in the open. 3 fell in rapid succession, the shots coming so fast it seemed impossible for one person to be making them. 13, 14, 15, Collins counted, his voice carrying a note of awe. Boss, whoever this is, they're not just good. They're operating at a level I've never seen. They're reading the battlefield like a book, anticipating every move. Morrison grabbed his binoculars, desperately scanning the northeast ridge where the shots had originated. For just a moment, a fraction of a second, he saw it. A silhouette low to the ground, partially obscured by rocks. Then it was gone, melting back into the terrain like water into sand. I saw something, he muttered. Northeast ridge behind the large boulder formation, but they've already moved. How? Ramirez asked. How do they move that fast and still maintain that accuracy? Thompson, despite his wounded shoulder, had dragged himself to a window. His face was pale from blood loss, but his eyes were alert. Boss, I've heard stories from the Afghan commandos. They talk about a ghost in these mountains. Someone who's been operating alone for years, hunting Taliban. Morrison turned to face him. What kind of stories? The kind you don't believe until you see it yourself. Thompson winced, clutching his shoulder. They say it's a woman, a sniper who can't be killed, who appears from nowhere and disappears like smoke. The Taliban are terrified of her. They call her. Another shot interrupted him. A Taliban fighter attempting to aim an RPG at their position fell before he could fire. 16 kills. They call her the White Ghost, Thompson finished. Morrison stared out at the mountainside where his team's mysterious savior continued their deadly work. A woman, operating alone in hostile territory. It seemed impossible. But then again, 10 minutes ago, it seemed impossible they'd survive this ambush. Boss, the Taliban are trying to fall back, Collins reported. They're retreating to that cave system at 11 o'clock. Morrison watched through his binoculars as the enemy commander led the withdrawal, his remaining fighters scrambling to follow. They'd had enough. Their ambush had turned into a massacre, and they didn't even know who was killing them. But the White Ghost, if that's who this really was, wasn't done. As the Taliban fighters ran, exposed and panicked, the mysterious sniper continued their methodical work. One shot, one kill, another fighter fell, then another. The precision was relentless, merciless. These weren't just random shots, this was someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who'd been planning and preparing for moments exactly like this. 17, 18, 19, Collins counted, his voice barely above a whisper now. They're getting picked apart. Morrison's radio crackled suddenly with the voice from base. Reaper 6, Viper base. Sandstorm is clearing faster than expected. QRF birds are spinning up now. ETA 25 minutes. Sit tight. 25 minutes. They could hold for 25 minutes, especially with their guardian angel keeping the enemy at bay. But Morrison's mind was already racing ahead. Who was this person? Why were they here? And most importantly, what happened to them that turned them into a ghost haunting these mountains? He watched as another Taliban fighter fell, the crack of the rifle echoing like thunder across the valley. 19 confirmed kills, and the battle was far from over. The sun was beginning its descent toward the jagged peaks, painting the valley in shades of amber and blood red. Morrison checked his watch. 15 minutes until extraction. 15 minutes that felt like an eternity when you were pinned down with wounded teammates and an enemy that, despite heavy losses, still had them surrounded. "Boss, movement at 2 o'clock, Collins called out, his voice tense. "Looks like they're trying to regroup behind that rock formation." Morrison shifted to get a better view. The Taliban had learned their lesson about exposing themselves in open ground. Now they were using every scrap of cover, moving in short bursts, trying to consolidate their forces for one final push. They knew American helicopters would be coming soon. If they were going to overrun the SEAL position, it had to be now. "They're getting smart," Ramirez observed, checking his ammunition. "Staying low, using cover, making it harder for our ghost to." The crack of a rifle cut him off. A Taliban fighter who'd been sprinting between two boulders crumpled mid-stride. The shooter had threaded the needle through a gap barely 2 feet wide. "Make that 20, Collins said, shaking his head in disbelief. "That shot. That shouldn't be possible. The timing, the lead, the angle, it's like they can see the future." Morrison had stopped trying to make sense of it. Whoever was out there had skills that transcended normal human capability. Or maybe they'd simply been doing this so long that the mountains had become an extension of their body, every rock and shadow as familiar as their own heartbeat. "Chen, anything on those encrypted transmissions?" Morrison asked. The communications specialist adjusted his equipment, headphones pressed tight against his ears. "Still getting them, boss. Short bursts every few minutes. I've been trying to triangulate, but whoever's sending them is using some serious tech. Military-grade encryption, frequency hopping. This isn't some amateur with a radio." "Can you tell what they're saying?" "Negative, but the timing is interesting. Every transmission comes right after our ghost takes a shot. It's like they're reporting kills to someone." Morrison frowned. "To who? We're the only friendlies in this sector." "That's what worries me," Chen replied. Doc Williams crawled over, keeping his head below the window line. "Jackson's asking for water. Thompson's stable but fatting in and out. We really need that evac, boss." 12 minutes, Morrison said, though he knew Doc understood the timeline as well as he did. They were all watching the clock, counting down each second like a prayer. Suddenly, the distinctive whoosh of an RPG launch filled the air. Morrison's head snapped up just in time to see the rocket-propelled grenade streaking toward their position from the northwest, a blind spot they hadn't been watching closely enough. "RPG, take cover," he shouted. The team flattened against the walls, bracing for impact, but the explosion never came. Instead, the RPG veered wildly off course and detonated harmlessly against the cliff face 50 meters away. In the same instant, Morrison saw the RPG operator through the smoke, or rather, where he'd been. The man was falling backward, a precise shot having found him the moment after he'd fired. "She shot him while he was launching," Collins whispered, his face pale. "The deflection from his body falling made the RPG go off target. That's impossible timing." 21, Morrison said quietly. 21 lives ended by someone they couldn't see, couldn't contact, couldn't even confirm existed. And yet, 21 reasons his team was still breathing. The light was fading fast now, the valley filling with shadows that seemed to reach up from the ground like grasping fingers. Morrison pulled out his night vision goggles, knowing the enemy would be doing the same. Darkness would change the equation. It would give the Taliban cover to advance, but it might also make them even more vulnerable to their phantom sniper. "All units switch to nods," Morrison ordered. "Stay sharp. They're going to make a move once it's fully dark." As if on cue, his thermal optics picked up movement, lots of it. The remaining Taliban fighters were spreading out, using the gathering darkness to maneuver into better positions. Morrison counted at least 15 heat signatures, maybe more. They'd taken massive casualties, but they were far from beaten. "Collins, you got thermals on our ghost." Collins was already scanning, his thermal scope sweeping the ridgelines methodically. "Negative, boss. If they're out there, they're running cold. Either that or they've got some kind of thermal camouflage I've never seen before." "How is that possible? Everyone gives off a heat signature." "Everyone we know about," Collins replied ominously. Then Morrison saw it, not with his eyes but with his understanding of the battlefield. The Taliban fighters weren't just repositioning randomly. They were converging on a specific area, the dried riverbed they'd tried to use before. But this time they were approaching from multiple angles, coordinating their movement. If they could mass their forces there, they'd have a covered route almost all the way to the compound. He grabbed his radio. "Unknown shooter, if you can hear me. Hostiles are massing in the riverbed at grid November Kilo 7495. They're using it as an avenue of approach. How copy?" "Static, always static." "It's worth a try," Doc said with a shrug. Morrison was about to respond when muzzle flashes erupted from a completely new position, due south, maybe 600 meters out. The mystery sniper had moved again, and this time they'd positioned themselves with a perfect angle down the length of the riverbed. The Taliban fighters never had a chance. The shots came in rapid succession, crack, 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 each one finding a target in the darkening riverbed. Morrison watched through his thermal sight as heat signatures dropped one after another, like dominoes falling in a deadly chain. The sniper was working from back to front, cutting off any retreat, trapping them in a kill zone they'd walked into willingly. 22, 23, 24, Collins counted, his voice carrying a mix of horror and admiration. "Boss, they're not just shooting, they're hurting them, driving them into specific positions where they can't take cover." Morrison saw it too. The sniper wasn't just reacting, they were controlling the battlefield, manipulating the enemy's movements like pieces on a chessboard. This wasn't combat. This was something else entirely. This was art painted in blood and gunpowder. The Taliban commander's voice cut through the darkness, screaming orders in Pashto that Morrison's years in country let him partially understand. Fall back, the ghost has us. Retreat." But retreating meant exposing themselves, and the sniper was ready. Another shot rang out, and Morrison saw through his thermal optics as the commander himself fell, his heat signature rapidly cooling. 25, Collins said softly. The remaining Taliban fighters broke completely. All tactical discipline abandoned, they ran scattering in different directions like startled animals. Some made it to cover, others weren't so lucky, but the mysterious sniper had stopped firing. 25 kills, not one more. Why'd they stop? Ramirez asked. There are still targets out there. Morrison understood, though he couldn't quite explain how. They got what they came for. They broke the attack. The rest are running, not fighting. Our ghost doesn't shoot people who are running away. That's a hell of a code to follow in a war zone, Doc observed. Maybe that's what keeps them human, Morrison replied. The distant thump of helicopter rotors began to echo through the valley. Their extraction had arrived early. The QRF birds were coming in fast and low, their door gunners ready to light up anything that moved wrong. Reaper 6, this is Viper 1-1, came the voice over the radio. We have eyes on your position. Prepare for extraction. How copy? Viper 1-1, Reaper 6. Copy all. Be advised, we have an unknown friendly sniper operating in the area. Do not engage targets on the ridgelines without confirmation. Say again, Reaper 6, unknown friendly. Morrison smiled grimly. You heard right, Viper. We've got a guardian angel out there. Let's not shoot them. As the helicopters began their approach, Morrison took one last look at the ridgeline where he'd glimpsed the silhouette earlier. Nothing. No movement, no heat signature, no sign that anyone had ever been there. But wedged in a crack in the compound's wall, Morrison spotted something that hadn't been there before. He pulled it out carefully, a single spent brass casing, still warm to the touch. On it, scratched carefully with a knife or similar tool, were 3 letters, SC. Collins, get ready to move the wounded, Morrison said, pocketing the casing. We're going home. But part of him knew this wasn't over. Somewhere in these mountains, a ghost was watching them leave, and Morrison intended to find out who SC was, even if it meant coming back to these mountains alone. The white ghost had saved their lives. Now Morrison owed them the truth. The Chinook helicopter's interior thrummed with mechanical violence as it carved through the Afghan night. Morrison sat with his back against the vibrating metal hull, watching Doc Williams work on Jackson and Thompson under the red glow of the cabin lights. Both wounded SEALs would make it. They'd been lucky. Luckier than they had any right to be. Collins sat across from him, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Boss, I've been doing this for 8 years. Worked with Delta snipers, Marine Scout snipers, even that Canadian who held the distance record. What we saw today, that was different. Morrison pulled out the brass casing he'd found, turning it over in his fingers. The letters SC caught the red light. Different how? It wasn't just the accuracy. It was the patience, the discipline. Every shot had a purpose. Take out their heavy weapons first, then their leadership, then create chaos. Whoever SC is, they weren't just helping us. They were executing a plan. A personal plan, Morrison added quietly. The helicopter's crew chief, a grizzled sergeant with 20 years in, leaned over. You guys talking about the white ghost? His voice carried over the rotor noise. Man, I've been flying these mountains for 3 tours. I've heard the stories. Morrison's head snapped up. What stories? The locals talk about her in whispers. A woman who hunts Taliban like animals. They say she's been out here for years, living in caves, moving at night, killing anyone who hurts civilians. The Taliban are more scared of her than they are of our drones. He paused, checking his weapon. Some of the guys think it's bullshit. Ghost stories to explain random sniper attacks. But I've seen the kill patterns. Someone's out there and they're damn good at staying invisible. Ramirez joined the conversation, his curiosity piqued. A woman, alone. How does someone survive that long in hostile territory? That's the question, isn't it? The crew chief replied. Some say she's got help from friendly villages. Others think she's completely off the grid, living like the enemy, using their own tactics against them. Morrison turned to Ahmed, their Afghan translator who'd been quietly sitting near the ramp. The young man's face was troubled, his eyes distant. Ahmed, you've been awfully quiet. You know something about this, don't you? Ahmed was silent for a long moment, as if weighing whether to speak. Finally, he nodded slowly. My cousin lives in Nangalam Valley, 2 provinces over. He told me a story last year that I did not believe. Now, I think maybe it was true. What story? Morrison pressed. There was a village called Kamdesh. Small place, maybe 40 families. 2 years ago there was a wedding. A local doctor was marrying an American soldier, a woman who was training our commandos in marksmanship. The Taliban did not approve. They said she was corrupting our people, teaching them Western ways. The cabin had gone quiet except for the helicopter's roar. Even Doc had stopped working, listening intently. Ahmed continued, his voice heavy. The Taliban came at night during the celebration. They killed everyone, the groom, his family, the guests, 47 people. They burned the village. When American forces arrived the next morning, they found only bodies. He paused, his hands clenching. But the American woman, the soldier, her body was never found. The official report said she was killed, burned beyond recognition. But my cousin, he heard different stories from survivors in nearby villages. What kind of stories? Collins asked. They say she survived, badly wounded, half dead, but she crawled out of that burning village. A shepherd found her days later, more dead than alive, and brought her to his home. His family nursed her back to health, but when she recovered, Ahmed's voice dropped. She was different, changed. The woman who had been full of life and laughter was gone. In her place was something else, something cold and filled with rage. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. She stayed. She vanished. But 3 months later, the Taliban commander who ordered the massacre was found dead in his compound, single bullet through the eye from 1,000 meters away. Then his lieutenants started dying. One by one, always at impossible distances, always when they thought they were safe. The Taliban put a price on her head, $100,000 American dollars, but no one can find her. No one even knows what she looks like anymore. Sergeant Yousef, the Afghan commando attached to their unit, spoke up for the first time. He was a hard man, a veteran of countless battles, and his voice carried weight. I have heard these stories too. The mullahs call her Shaitan, devil, but the people in the villages, they call her something else. Negabin, the guardian. They say she protects those who cannot protect themselves. You believe it? Morrison asked. Yousef met his eyes. 2 months ago, my unit was tracking a Taliban cell that had been kidnapping young girls from villages for forced marriages. We were closing in when we found their compound already destroyed. 8 dead Taliban, all precision kills from long range. The girls were gone, released, we learned later, returned safely to their families. We found no evidence of who did it, but we found something strange. What? A playing card. The Queen of Spades, left on the Taliban commander's body. Yousef pulled out his wallet and removed a faded photograph, handing it to Morrison. I kept this. It is from the wedding in Kamdesh. Someone left it at the American base in Jalalabad after the massacre. Morrison stared at the photo. It showed a young couple radiant with joy. The man was handsome, Afghan, dressed in traditional wedding clothes. The woman beside him wore a white dress, her blonde hair styled elegantly, her smile bright and genuine. But it was her eyes that caught Morrison, sharp, intelligent, alive with humor and confidence. Her name was Sergeant First Class Sarah Chen, Yousef said. Sniper instructor with the U.S. Army, one of their best. She fell in love with a local doctor who was helping Americans. The Taliban made an example of them both. Morrison couldn't stop staring at the photo. This laughing, vibrant woman had become the ghost that saved his team, had become a legend whispered about in these mountains. As if reading his thoughts, Collins spoke quietly. 25 confirmed kills today, boss. All precision shots at combat ranges that would make most snipers quit. If that's Sarah Chen out there, she's not the same person in that photo anymore. No, Morrison agreed, pocketing both the photo and the brass casing. She's something else now, something we created when we failed to protect her. The helicopter began its descent toward Bagram Airfield. Through the open ramp, Morrison could see the lights of the base growing larger. Safety, civilization, Everything that Sarah Chen had given up when she chose to stay in these mountains. Doc Williams finished bandaging Thompson and looked up. "So what do we do, boss? Report this, try to find her." Morrison thought about the woman in the photo, young, happy, full of life. Then he thought about the ghost who'd moved through the mountains like smoke, dealing death with mechanical precision. Sarah Chen had died in that burning village 2 years ago. What survived was something different, something that these mountains needed, even if it cost her everything. "We file our report," Morrison said finally. "We tell them an unknown friendly assisted us, but the rest, the stories, the speculation, the photo, that stays with us. If Sarah Chen is out there, she's out there for a reason. She saved our lives today. The least we can do is not destroy whatever she's become." The wheels touched down on the tarmac with a jarring thud. As the team filed out into the harsh lights of the base, Morrison took one last look at the dark mountains in the distance. Somewhere out there, a ghost was watching, and Morrison silently promised that if their paths crossed again, he'd be ready with answers instead of questions. The legend of the white ghost had just become very real, and Morrison intended to learn the whole truth, no matter how long it took. The Taliban commander's voice cut through the valley like a blade, sharp and filled with fury. Through his rifle scope, Morrison watched the man rally his remaining fighters, gesturing violently toward the compound. Even at 300 meters, Morrison could read the desperation in his body language. They'd lost over 20 men to a ghost they couldn't find, and their American prey was still alive. The helicopters would be coming soon. It was now or never. "They're massing for a final push," Collins reported, tracking multiple targets through his scope. "I count 15, maybe 17 fighters. They're grouping at the cave entrance." Morrison's jaw tightened. 15 against 7, with 2 of his men wounded and unable to fight effectively. The numbers weren't good, but they'd faced worse odds. "Chen, how long until those birds arrive?" 8 minutes, boss, maybe less." 8 minutes, an eternity in combat. The Taliban commander raised his AK-47 above his head and screamed something Morrison couldn't fully hear. But he didn't need to understand the words. The intent was crystal clear. This was a death charge. They were coming with everything they had. "Here they come," Ramirez shouted. "Multiple hostiles advancing from the northwest." The enemy fighters poured out of their concealed positions like water breaking through a dam. They weren't using tactics anymore. No cover, no fire and maneuver. This was pure aggression, a human wave meant to overwhelm through sheer numbers and violence. They fired as they ran, bullets pinging off stone and whistling through windows. "Light them up," Morrison commanded, his M4 barking as he engaged the closest threats. "Controlled pairs make every shot count." The compound erupted with gunfire. Collins dropped 2 fighters in quick succession. Ramirez's shots were methodical, textbook centermass hits, but the enemy kept coming, screaming, firing, climbing over their own dead. An explosion rocked the eastern wall. Morrison's ears rang as dust and debris filled the air. "Breach! They've breached the east wall." Taliban fighters poured through the gap like ants through a crack. The fighting became desperate, close-quarters chaos. Morrison switched to his sidearm, putting 3 rounds into a fighter who'd made it within 10 feet. Ramirez was grappling with another, their weapons knocked aside, fighting hand-to-hand. This was it, the moment where training and luck separated the living from the dead. Then the tempo changed. The crack of the distant rifle came faster now, shots spaced only seconds apart instead of the careful, measured pace from before. Morrison saw a fighter at the breach entrance jerk backward, a red mist where his head had been. Then another fell. And another. The mystery sniper had changed tactics, working at closer range, taking rapid shots to support the SEALs directly. "She's in close," Collins yelled, his voice carrying a note of alarm. "Boss, our ghost is danger close, maybe 400 meters exposed position." Morrison risked a glance through the northern gap in the wall. There, On a rocky outcrop that provided almost no cover, he saw her. The image burned into his memory in the half-second before he had to turn back to the fight. A figure dressed in a patchwork of tactical gear and tattered civilian clothes, lean and compact, face wrapped in a scarf against the dust. The rifle looked custom-built, every line purposeful. She moved with practiced efficiency, working the bolt, acquiring targets, firing, a deadly rhythm that spoke of thousands of hours of training and real-world application. But what struck Morrison most was her position. She deliberately placed herself in an almost suicidal location, completely exposed to enemy fire, solely to get better angles on the Taliban fighters attacking the compound. She was protecting them at the cost of her own safety. "6 o'clock, Doc shouted. Morrison spun. A Taliban fighter had flanked around, coming through a collapsed section of wall Morrison had forgotten about. The man's rifle was rising, finger on the trigger, aimed straight at Morrison's chest. The shot came before Morrison could react. The fighter's rifle clattered to the ground unfired, his body following. Morrison's head snapped back to the northern outcrop. She'd seen the threat, adjusted, fired, all in less than 2 seconds. She just saved his life. Fall back, fall back." The Taliban commander's voice was hoarse, breaking. He'd finally accepted the truth. They couldn't win this. Not against the Americans, and certainly not against the ghost who protected them. The surviving fighters began to retreat, backing away from the compound, dragging their wounded. But the sniper wasn't finished. Morrison watched through his scope as she tracked them, her rifle moving with predatory smoothness. One fighter fell, then another. She was picking off the stragglers, the ones who'd been most aggressive, the ones who'd made it closest to killing SEALs. 23 confirmed, Collins counted. 24, 25. At 25 she stopped. The remaining Taliban fighters were in full retreat now, abandoning their weapons, running for their lives. Morrison watched as the mystery sniper, Sarah Chen if the stories were true, slowly lowered her rifle. She didn't pursue, didn't take the easy shots on fleeing targets. She just watched them run. The valley fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the moaning of the wind and the distant thunder of approaching helicopters. Morrison's ears rang from the gunfire. His hands shook with adrenaline, but they'd held. They'd survived. "Boss, she's moving," Collins said urgently. Morrison looked back to the outcrop. The figure was gathering her gear with quick, practiced movements. She knew the helicopters were coming, knew there would be questions she didn't want to answer. As Morrison watched, she slung her rifle across her back and began climbing down from the outcrop. "I'm going after her," Morrison said suddenly. "Boss, we need to secure the LZ," Ramirez protested. "You secure it. I need 3 minutes." Morrison was already moving toward the northern exit, his rifle at the ready. He had to see her, had to thank her, had to understand who she was and why she'd saved them. He pushed through the compound's broken doorway and ran toward the outcrop, his boots pounding on loose shale. The helicopters were getting closer. He could see their lights now, sweeping across the valley floor. He had maybe 90 seconds before they landed. Morrison reached the outcrop and climbed, his muscles burning. When he pulled himself up to where she'd been positioned, she was gone. But the evidence of her presence remained. Spent brass casing still warm to the touch, a flattened area where she'd laid prone, and drag marks in the dust leading toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. He followed the marks into the crevice, finding it opened into a small natural shelter. Inside, a tactical pack with supplies, a first aid kit with bloody gauze she'd been hit during the fight, and a trail of blood drops leading deeper into the mountain. "Morrison, we need you at the LZ," the radio crackled with urgency. He started to follow the blood trail, but it disappeared into a maze of rocks where tracking became impossible. She knew these mountains like her own skin, knew every cave and crevice. She'd vanished like smoke. But wedged into a crack in the rock, Morrison found something she'd left behind deliberately, he thought. A playing card, the Queen of Spades, its edges worn from handling. On the back, written in small, precise letters, "Thank you for your service, but my war isn't over yet. SC." Morrison stood in the fading light, holding the card, understanding flooding through him. Sarah Chen wasn't lost. She wasn't broken. She was exactly where she chose to be, fighting the war that had taken everything from her on her own terms. The helicopter rotors were deafening now. Morrison pocketed the card and began his descent. He had a team to evacuate, a report to file, and a mystery to solve. But first, they had to get home alive, something they owed entirely to a ghost who refused to stop fighting. The Chinooks touched down in a maelstrom of dust and rotor wash, their door gunners scanning the perimeter with night vision goggles. Morrison stood at the compound's entrance, his eyes fixed on the dark mountains where Sarah Chen had disappeared. Every instinct told him to get on that helicopter, to follow orders, to let it go. But something deeper, a debt, a curiosity, maybe respect, pulled him in the opposite direction. "Collins, Ramirez, Chen, on me," Morrison ordered, checking his rifle. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they force us on those birds. Let's move." "Boss, this is crazy," Chen protested, but he was already grabbing his gear. "What are we even looking for?" "Answers." The four SEALs moved quickly toward the outcrop where Morrison had last seen the mystery sniper. The pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Reaper 6, we're on the ground. Load up, we need to get your wounded out of here." "Copy, Viper, give me 5 mics," Morrison replied, securing the perimeter. "Sir, the perimeter is secure. We need to." Morrison switched channels. He'd apologize later. They climbed the rocky slope in tactical formation, weapons ready, though Morrison doubted Sarah Chen would ambush them. She'd had dozens of opportunities to kill them if that had been her intent. Still, caution kept soldiers alive. Collins reached the outcrop first, his flashlight sweeping the area. "Spent brass everywhere, boss, at least 40 casings. She was working this position hard." He bent down, examining the ground. "Blood here too, fresh. She took a hit during the fighting." Morrison's chest tightened. She'd been wounded while protecting them and they hadn't even known. "Find the trail. She can't have gone far if she's bleeding." Ramirez spotted the crevice opening, the disturbed dust marking recent passage. "Here, she went through here." They squeezed through the narrow gap one by one, emerging into a hidden chamber carved by centuries of wind and water. Morrison's flashlight beam swept across the space, and his breath caught. This was more than a sniper's hide. This was someone's home. A military-grade sleeping bag lay rolled in one corner, beside it a backpack with visible wear and careful repairs. Medical supplies were organized with almost obsessive precision in a plastic container: field dressings, antibiotics, suture kits, pain medication. A small camping stove sat near a ventilation crack in the rock. Everything was neat, efficient, the shelter of someone who'd been living this way for a long time. But it was the walls that told the real story. "Jesus," Collins whispered. Photographs were pinned to a makeshift board made from scavenged wood. Taliban commanders, cell leaders, weapons smugglers. Each photo marked with either a red X or a date written in small, precise handwriting. Morrison counted 23 faces with red X's, 23 men who would never hurt anyone again. Chen examined the board more closely. "Boss, these aren't random targets. This is intelligence work. She's been systematically taking apart their command structure in this region." Ramirez had found something else. A larger photograph, water-stained and worn, pinned separately from the others. Morrison's heart sank as he recognized it. The wedding photo Yosef had shown them. Sarah Chen in her white dress, her fiancé beside her, both of them radiating joy and hope and a future that had been burned to ash. "She keeps it with her," Morrison said quietly, "a reminder of what she's fighting for." "Or what she lost," Collins added. Morrison's flashlight found more items. A journal filled with handwritten notes in cramped, precise script. maps marked with Taliban movements and supply routes. A small photograph of an older couple, her parents, perhaps, paper creased from handling, and a tattered American flag patch, the kind worn on military uniforms, edges frayed with age. Chen was examining a different section of the cave. "Boss, she's got a whole intelligence operation here. Radio equipment, solar charger, encrypted comm device. She's not just surviving, she's running missions." Morrison picked up the journal carefully, opening it to a random page. The entry was dated 3 months ago. "Eliminated HVT-17 today at 1,247 meters. Clean shot. His men scattered. Village of Wanat is safe for now. Found antibiotics in his compound, delivered them to the village elder. Fever is breaking. Winter will be hard this year. Need to stockpile more supplies before the pass is close." The clinical precision of the tactical report mixed with genuine concern for villagers painted a complex picture. Sarah Chen hadn't become a mindless killing machine. She'd become something else, a guardian operating outside any official chain of command, protecting people who had nowhere else to turn. "Here's the blood trail," Ramirez called from deeper in the cave. "Leads to a back exit." They followed it through a narrow tunnel that opened onto the mountainside's far slope. The trail continued for about 50 meters, then stopped at a flat rock where Sarah had clearly paused to treat her wound. Bloody gauze and an empty antiseptic packet lay discarded. Beyond that point, the trail vanished. She'd either bandaged herself well enough to stop the bleeding or was skilled enough to mask her tracks. Morrison scanned the darkening landscape with his night vision. Nothing. She could be anywhere, watching them right now from 1,000 meters away or already miles distant. The mountains held their secrets well. Collins knelt by the treatment site and found something wedged between two rocks. He held it up, another playing card, the Queen of Spades, but this one was different. On the back was a hand-drawn map marking a location about 3 kilometers northeast and a single word: winter. "She's telling us where she'll be," Collins said, incredulous, "or where her winter base is." "Why?" Chen asked. "Why leave us breadcrumbs?" Morrison understood. "Because we saw her, we know she exists. She's giving us a choice: report her location and end her war, or keep her secret and let her continue." He pocketed the card carefully. "She's trusting us." The radio erupted with angry chatter. "Reaper 6, we are departing in 2 minutes with or without you. Get to the LZ now." "We have to go," Ramirez said urgently. Morrison took one last look at the cave entrance, then at the mountains beyond. Sarah Chen was out there somewhere, wounded, alone, fighting a war that should have ended 2 years ago. She'd saved their lives without asking for anything in return. The least they could do was honor her choice. "Take everything we touched," Morrison ordered. "Wipe down the flashlight marks, make it look like we were never here. What we saw stays between us. Understood?" His team nodded without hesitation. They understood loyalty, understood debts that couldn't be repaid with words. As they climbed back down to the LZ, Morrison felt the weight of 2 items in his pocket: the wedding photograph and the Queen of Spades. 2 pieces of a woman who'd been broken and reforged into something the world would never officially acknowledge. The helicopter engines were screaming now, the pilots beyond impatient. Morrison and his team sprinted across the open ground and leaped aboard just as the wheels lifted off. Through the open door, Morrison watched the valley recede, the compound growing smaller, the mountains swallowing the secrets they held. Somewhere in those mountains, a ghost was watching them leave, and Morrison silently vowed he'd be back, not to capture her or stop her, but to understand her, to help her if she'd let him. The white ghost had saved 8 lives today. Now it was Morrison's turn to save hers, even if she didn't know she needed saving yet. Bagram Airfield buzzed with controlled chaos at 300 hours. Morrison sat in the debriefing room, a bare concrete box lit by harsh fluorescent lights, facing Major Daniels from S2 Intelligence. Jackson and Thompson had been rushed to the field hospital and were stable. The rest of his team waited outside, their silence speaking volumes about what they'd agreed to keep quiet. "Let me get this straight, Commander," Daniels said, reviewing Morrison's after-action report on a tablet. "You're telling me an unknown Allied sniper engaged and eliminated 25 enemy combatants while you were pinned down?" "That's correct, sir." "And you have no idea who this person was? No radio contact, no visual identification?" Morrison kept his expression neutral. "We were under heavy fire, sir. I caught a brief glimpse through the dust. Lone shooter, appeared highly skilled. Could have been a local friendly, another coalition unit we weren't briefed on, or an independent contractor." Daniels leaned back, skeptical. "Commander, there are no friendly units in that sector, no contractors authorized to operate there, and our Afghan allies don't have anyone with that level of skill operating independently." He paused. "Unless you're suggesting this was some kind of divine intervention." "I'm suggesting someone saved my team's lives, sir. Beyond that, I don't have answers." The major studied him for a long moment. Morrison had been in enough interrogations, both sides of the table, to know when someone didn't believe him. But Daniels couldn't prove Morrison was holding back, and the operation had been successful. The high-value target was in custody, and all SEALs had made it out alive. "Fine," Daniels said finally. "I'll file this as unknown Allied support. But Commander, if you remember any additional details, you bring them to me immediately. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Morrison was dismissed with a warning to get some sleep. Instead, he went straight to the intelligence center, using his clearance to access the computer terminals. The base was quiet at this hour, only night shift personnel and insomniacs wandering the corridors. He pulled up the terminal and stared at the login screen, the wedding photograph from Sarah's cave burning a hole in his pocket. He knew what he was about to do violated about a dozen protocols, but he'd come too far to stop now. Morrison uploaded the photograph to the military's biometric database, the same system used to identify enemy combatants and track personnel. The software hummed, scanning facial features, running comparisons against millions of records. "Match found." His heart rate spiked as a service record populated the screen. CHEN Sarah Lynn. Rank Sergeant First Class, E7. Branch United States Army. MOS 11B Infantry/37F Psychological Operations. Secondary Sniper Instructor Marksmanship Training Unit. Status Killed in Action. Date of death April 15, 2023. Location Kamdesh District, Nuristan Province, Afghanistan. Morrison's hands trembled as he scrolled through her record. Sarah Chen had been exceptional top of her sniper class, multiple deployments decorated for valor. She'd volunteered for a training mission with Afghan commandos, teaching advanced marksmanship techniques. Her evaluations were glowing: exceptional tactical awareness, natural instructor, build strong rapport with local forces. Then he found the incident report from April 15th. The Taliban had attacked during a village wedding celebration, targeting Sarah and her fiancé, Dr. Rafik Ahmadi, a local physician who worked with American forces. The attack killed 47 people. When the Quick Reaction Force arrived, they found the village still burning, bodies everywhere. Sarah's personal effects were recovered, dog tags melted by fire, fragments of uniform, but no body. The official determination: killed in action, remains unrecoverable due to fire damage. But Morrison knew the truth now. Sarah hadn't died in that fire. She'd crawled out, survived, and decided that official channels had failed her, so she'd become something else entirely. He dug deeper, cross-referencing enemy casualty reports in the region over the past 2 years. The pattern emerged like a constellation: precision kills at extreme range, Taliban commanders and cell leaders eliminated systematically, always in provinces surrounding Nuristan. The kills clustered around villages that had been threatened or attacked. She'd been hunting for 2 years, and nobody had connected the dots. Morrison printed everything he could, stuffing the papers into a folder. He knew he was breaking about 50 regulations, but Sarah Chen deserved better than being forgotten, listed as KIA while she fought a ghost war in the mountains. He went straight to his commanding officer's quarters, despite the early hour. Captain Richard Hayes was a career SEAL, 15 years in, and Morrison's friend as much as his superior. If anyone would listen, it would be Hayes. "This better be important, Morrison," Hayes said, opening the door in PT gear, clearly roused from sleep. "It is, sir. May I come in?" 5 minutes later, Hayes was sitting at his desk, reviewing the documents Morrison had spread before him. The wedding photo, the service record, the casualty patterns, the Queen of Spades card with Sarah's initials. "Jesus Christ," Hayes breathed. "You're telling me a supposedly dead Army sergeant saved your entire team?" "Yes, sir. Sarah Chen is alive and operating as a vigilante in the mountains. She's been systematically taking apart Taliban networks for 2 years. Hayes rubbed his face, the implications crashing down. "Morrison, do you understand what you're suggesting? If Chen is alive and operating without authorization, she's technically a deserter. We'd have to bring her in, court-martial her." "She's not a deserter, sir. She's doing the job we should have done. She's protecting civilians, eliminating high-value targets, and she's doing it better than anyone else out there." "That's not how the military works, and you know it." Hayes stood, packing. "We have rules, chain of command, legal frameworks. Chen can't just decide to wage her own private war." "Why not?" Morrison shot back. "The system failed her fiancé, failed that entire village. She came back from the dead and found a way to make a difference. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing?" Hayes stared at him for a long moment. "You're too close to this, Commander. You feel like you owe her, and maybe you do. But bringing this up the chain, it won't help her. It'll just get her killed or imprisoned." "So what do you suggest, sir? We pretend she doesn't exist." "That's exactly what I suggest." Hayes gathered the documents and handed them back. "File your after-action report as submitted. Unknown Allied support. Let it die there. Sarah Chen is officially KIA, and maybe that's where she needs to stay." Morrison felt anger rising in his chest. She deserves better. She deserves to keep doing what she's doing without the military bureaucracy crushing her. Hayes interrupted. "You want to help her? Then leave her alone. Let her be the ghost everyone thinks she is." Morrison stood there, the folder heavy in his hands, understanding the impossible position. Officially acknowledging Sarah meant ending her mission. Keeping her secret meant abandoning her to fight alone indefinitely. "Dismissed, Commander," Hayes said quietly. "And Morrison, lose those documents, that's an order." Morrison walked back to his quarters in the pre-dawn darkness, his mind churning. He should follow orders, should let it go, should trust that Sarah Chen knew what she was doing. But he couldn't. He spent the next 3 days during downtime tracking every piece of intelligence he could find. Enemy movement patterns, civilian reports, unusual activity in remote provinces. He built a map, plotting locations where Sarah's signature kills appeared, always protecting villages, always targeting Taliban leadership, always operating alone. She moved like water through the mountains, never staying in one place, never leaving a pattern that could be predicted. Almost never. Morrison found it on the 4th day, a cluster of kills near a village called Gambir, always in winter months, always from the same general area. She had a winter base, somewhere she returned to when the passes closed. The Queen of Spades card she'd left them had marked it. Winter. He stared at the map coordinates, memorizing them. 3 kilometers northeast of where they'd found her cave. Accessible only during certain months. Defendable, isolated, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Morrison made a decision that would probably end his career. He filed for leave 2 weeks, citing family matters. It was approved without question. He'd been deployed for 8 months straight and was due for a break. But Morrison wasn't going home. He was going back to those mountains, back to find the ghost who'd saved his life, not to capture her, not to stop her. To understand her, to help her if she'd let him, to maybe, just maybe, convince her that she didn't have to fight alone anymore. The white ghost had saved 8 men who'd written themselves off as dead. Now Morrison would try to save the one woman who'd already died once and refused to stay buried. Even if it meant going rogue himself. 3 weeks later, Gambier Province. Morrison moved through the pre-dawn darkness alone, his breath forming clouds in the frigid mountain air. He'd left his team at a forward operating base 40 kilometers south, telling them he needed to scout a potential target location. Collins had given him a long, knowing look but hadn't asked questions. Some things were better left unspoken. The coordinates from Sarah's card had led him here, to a narrow valley tucked between 2 peaks, accessible only by a treacherous goat trail that would kill most men attempting it in darkness. But Morrison had spent 3 days studying the approach, planning each step, knowing that if Sarah Chen wanted him dead, he'd never hear the shot that killed him. The village cemetery appeared as the sun crested the eastern ridge, painting the simple stone markers in shades of gold and amber. It was a peaceful place, overlooking the valley where morning mist clung to the ground like spirits refusing to depart. Morrison counted 20 graves, most old, weathered by decades of harsh winters. One was newer, the stone less worn. Morrison approached slowly, reading the inscription carved in both Pashto and English. Dr. Rifiq Ahmadi. Healer, teacher, friend. Taken too soon, loved forever. She was already there. Sarah Chen stood on the far side of the grave, dressed in worn tactical pants and a faded jacket that had seen better years. Her blonde hair, once styled elegantly in the wedding photo, was now cut short and practical. Her face was lean, weathered by sun and wind, marked by a scar that ran from her left temple to her jawline, a souvenir from the night that changed everything. But it was her eyes that struck Morrison most. They held a depth of pain and purpose that no photograph could capture. These were the eyes of someone who'd walked through hell and decided to make it her permanent address. Her custom rifle leaned against a nearby stone, within easy reach but not threatening. She'd known he was coming, probably tracked him for the last kilometer. The question was whether she'd let him leave. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison," she said, her voice rougher than he'd expected, abraded by years of silence and solitude. "You're either very brave or very stupid to come here alone." "Maybe both," Morrison replied, stopping 10 feet away, hands visible, non-threatening. "I needed to see you, to thank you." "You already thanked me, you kept my secret." Sarah's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Your after-action report was creative, unknown allied support. I appreciate the discretion. You've been watching us, monitoring our communications." "I watch everything in these mountains, Commander. It's how I've stayed alive." She tilted her head, studying him. "So why are you really here? To convince me to come back? To tell me I'm wanted for desertion? To put a bullet in me and close a loose end?" Morrison shook his head slowly. "None of those. I came because you saved my team's life and I wanted you to know. You're one of the best operators I've ever seen. What you did that day, it was beyond extraordinary. You deserve to be recognized, celebrated, brought home as a hero." "Home?" Sarah's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Commander, I died 2 years ago in this valley. What came back wasn't Sarah Chen, Army Sergeant, bride-to-be, daughter, friend. That woman burned in Kamdesh. What survived?" She gestured at herself, at the mountains around them, "is something else, something that belongs here. You're still human, Sarah, you still bleed. I saw the blood trail, you were wounded saving us." "A graze, nothing serious." She touched her side absently. "Physical wounds heal, It's the other kind that never do. Morrison took a careful step closer. The system failed you, I understand that. But operating alone, cut off from support, living like this, it's not sustainable. Eventually, you'll make a mistake, get wounded badly enough that you can't treat yourself, or the Taliban will get lucky. Then I'll die doing what matters, Sarah interrupted, her voice hard as the stones around them. Do you know what official channels did, Commander? They gave me a folded flag and a condolence letter. They told me Rafik was an unfortunate casualty of war. They investigated for exactly 3 weeks, then filed it away. The men who killed him, who killed 47 innocent people, were still walking free, still planning attacks, still destroying lives. She gestured toward the valley below. These villages have no one else. The Afghan police are corrupt or scared. Coalition forces rotate out every few months, never staying long enough to make a real difference. But I'm here. I know every trail, every cave, every family. When the Taliban come, I stop them. When they threaten children, I end them. This isn't some revenge fantasy. It's the mission our government said mattered, then abandoned. Morrison felt the weight of her words. She wasn't wrong. He'd seen it himself. The endless deployments, the temporary victories, the revolving door of personnel who never stayed long enough to build real relationships with locals. Sarah had done what the entire military couldn't. She'd committed fully. I'm not here to stop you, Morrison said finally. I'm here because warriors like you shouldn't fight alone. You need supplies, intelligence, medical support, things I can provide off the books. Sarah's expression shifted, surprise flickering across her features. You'd risk your career for a ghost. You risked your life for 8 men you didn't know. Morrison pulled out a small package from his pack, satellite phone, medical supplies, ammunition, encrypted communication device. This phone has one contact me. If you ever need backup, extraction, intelligence, anything, call. No questions, no reports, no strings. He set the package on a flat stone between them. I can't bring you back, Sarah, but I can make sure you're not completely alone out here. Sarah stared at the package for a long moment, then at Morrison. Something shifted in her eyes, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of the woman she'd been. Why? Because you're still fighting for something bigger than yourself. That deserves respect, not abandonment. Morrison stepped back. The war took everything from you. Don't let it take your humanity too. They stood in silence as the sun climbed higher, warming the cold stones. Finally, Sarah picked up the package, weighing it in her hands. Tell Collins his spotting was good that day, she said. He's got talent. Morrison smiled. She'd been watching them even closer than he'd realized. I will. And Commander, Sarah met his eyes, stay away from the northern passes next month. I've tracked a major Taliban movement there. It's going to get loud. Intelligence, freely given. A gesture of trust from someone who trusted no one. Morrison nodded. Understood. Stay safe, Sergeant Chen. I'm not a sergeant anymore. I'm just the white ghost. But her voice was softer now, carrying a hint of the woman in the wedding photograph. Thank you for coming, Morrison, for not trying to save me from myself. You don't need saving, you need support. There's a difference. Morrison turned and began the long descent back down the mountain. He didn't look back. Somehow it felt wrong, like looking back would break whatever fragile understanding they'd reached. Behind him, Sarah Chen stood in the cemetery, holding the package, watching him disappear into the trail. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel entirely alone. As Morrison reached the valley floor, his radio crackled. Reaper 6, this is Collins. You find what you were looking for. Morrison smiled, thinking of the ghost watching from above, of the phone that would connect them, of a promise to support a warrior the world thought was dead. Yeah, Collins, mission accomplished. Let's go home. But in his heart, Morrison knew his mission with Sarah Chen was just beginning. The white ghost would continue her war in the shadows, and he would be there, a lifeline, a supporter, a friend to someone who'd sacrificed everything. Some debts could never be repaid. Some warriors never came home, but at least now Sarah Chen would know she wasn't completely forgotten. The legend would continue, whispered in villages, feared by the Taliban, invisible to official records. And somewhere in Washington, in a filing cabinet marked classified, her status would forever read, "Killed in action." Sometimes the greatest heroes were the ones the world never knew existed. The end.